Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dirt NFCA podcast presented by Netting Professionals. You are in for a treat. We have the first in a series of podcasts centered around the 50th anniversary of Title IX and a lot of growth in the organization. And who better to lead us off with organizational growth than Rayla Allison, who was the first full-time director of the now NFCA, amongst other things. And we're going to get into this storied career at length. But first of all, Rayla, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to reconnect with your fellow softball coaches.
Joanna, thank you for having me. And how could I not accept the invitation to a podcast when I was the first full-time executive director of the NFCA? In those early days, there were so many people that made it happen so that when I took the helm, it was a strong organization. So giving back and being a part of NFCA is quite a pleasure for me. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we'll start right there with the early days. You know, we spoke at length before we recorded this one, and the things that you were just kind of throwing out with ease of, oh yeah, I caught for Joni and some of the fun things. Tell me, where did your love of softball start? And where did you begin as a student athlete and on into, for people who aren't familiar with your story?
You know, the love of softball started actually with my mother and father. I grew up just outside of Fort Worth in a small suburb, and they didn't have any girls' sports recreationally at that time. And both my father had played baseball in high school, and my mother had played softball, I guess, in sort of an intramural way. And so they helped start the league in Benbrook, Texas. In the first year, we didn't have softball equipment. We had baseball equipment that was leftover equipment from baseball recreation that had been played for years in that community. And so we played with baseballs, and the next year we found sponsors, my parents did and other parents, and we had money to buy softball equipment, and that's where it started. And I actually started as a pitcher, you know, in those early days.
And for you, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I was going to say, in high school at the time, I graduated from high school in 1972, which we all know is a famous year because of Title IX. But in high school at that time, there was the only high school sport at my high school was tennis. So I played tennis, and then played softball in the summer for ASA. But I also played AAU basketball and a little volleyball on the side. And my parents were, you know, they encouraged me a great deal to pursue that. Then when I went to college, my first year was at a small private college in Fort Worth, and I played basketball. I picked up throwing javelin and had a strong arm and did quite well. Played badminton and volleyball, and you could play multiple sports in those days. You just went season to season. Then I transferred to University of Texas at Arlington, and I was one of the first women to receive a college scholarship in the state. I remember being interviewed by news channels on that. And I was a catcher at that time. I realized that I could be a much better catcher. And being a former pitcher, it also helped me being a catcher. And my coach at University of Texas Arlington was the famous Jody Conrad, who is a Hall of Fame coach. He went from there to University of Texas and won national championships. And so she played an important role in my life.
And continued to be an administrator that, you know, did a lot as well. That's great. Do you ever look back on it, Rayla, and think how impressive your mother was at that time? I just try to think, you know, historically, there couldn't have been very many moms that were willing to tell their daughters, no, go do this. We're going to find a way. We're going to start that. That is very cool that you had that experience.
Well, if you could have only met my mother, it was just who she was. It's interesting because she felt like there was nothing, and she told this to me many times, there was nothing that a woman couldn't do that a man does. She grew up hunting and fishing and playing sports with her brothers, and wherever she got a chance, participated in sports. And she just felt like if Rayla wanted to do it, then I'm going to make it happen. So I'm very fortunate to have that type of mother. And it's interesting, I've talked to friends that had female mentors like that made a difference in their life. And so if I were looking back on who was my strongest mentor, it was my mother.
I think that's fantastic. I love hearing those stories, especially when it wasn't the norm, and it, probably was some pushback there from community and other people when you took that venture. Do you remember some of the first times that when you were growing up, obviously thinking I can do anything, having that instilled in you, that you were surprised by or taken aback by some of the inequalities that you and your teammates were dealt with?
I wouldn't say surprised, because subtly over time you pick up on those things. As I said, we didn't have anything but baseball equipment that first year of the local league, um, and it took a while to get the sponsors. And so I'd also seen it in my family, not my immediate family, but how others would treat my mother. She was actually a much better fisherman and hunter than my father was. And so she'd be right there with the guys. And it's like, well, our wives don't come. So you pick that up as you're growing up. One of and I have to say, in those days, and I don't know if it's true today with today's athletes, I was just so happy to play ball. I remember getting the scholarship at Texas Arlington, and I never thought about how much the men in their sports program would have received in a scholarship until later, when I was a senior and I started doing some research for a class on Jody Conrad's salary and what she was making coaching 3 sports, teaching 2 or 3 classes, and she made less than the lowest assistant on who was a graduate student on the football team. And it was I guess at that time that it shocked me, but not earlier. It was all subtle, and you grow up around it.
So many of those so many of those salary inequities continue at such alarming rates. We see so much of that right now with schools that are paying millions and millions and millions to coaches who are no longer even working at the university, and you have coaches who are putting in World Series appearance after World Series appearance, championships, and at such a major disadvantage when it comes to a lot of that. So definitely not something that has changed a whole lot. Definitely gotten better in some regards, but still a lot of work to go there. And you coached multiple sports as well. That's foreign for some coaches. Now they think about being a collegiate coach and it would never cross their mind. What did you love the most about teaching multiple sports? And do you think that being a physical education teacher and also a coach of multiple sports, did that make your athletes better because you were a little more well-versed?
I think it did. I think the teaching training that you receive in your undergraduate work, and even if you pursue a master's or on, is very helpful in coaching. You learn what is the best practices and how your players will learn or your students will learn what doesn't work. The coach that goes out today and they want to hit thousands or hundreds, let me say hundreds, of ground balls to infielder doesn't realize that there's research that says mass practice opportunities are not as successful as distributed practice opportunities. So it definitely helped me in having that knowledge in education. I actually never taught physical education. I taught biology, but those same teaching principles stay with me today in whatever I'm doing, and it definitely helped. In the early days, so many of the coaches, women coaches, started out as physical education teachers, and then they received a stipend to coach. And we have great coaches that never have had a teacher education background, but I think they've made the effort to attend NFCA conventions. They learn from the top coaches. They learn what has been the best practices in the field. It helps to have that educational background. You don't have to have it, but I think if you don't have it, you should be a student of the game, understand coaching philosophies and the approach to teaching our players in the game. Teaching players highest level of the professional sport. You watch the Winter Olympics going on right now, and you see their coaches working with them, the athletes, before they begin the competition. And so, you know, I wouldn't say that you have to have a background in education, in a degree. I think it's very helpful, or you make up for it because you're really a student of the game and what are the best practices in reaching those players and motivating those players.
When I have to think student of a game, you would be thriving right now. Your background in biology and human kinetics, and you know, all of the things that are going on, and some of this just resurgence, if you will, of really understanding the body and the way we move, and how much that has become a part of, especially hitting and pitching. And you're smiling. Does that just make your heart happy? Like, you seeing some of the meshing of the physiology, biology, and the sport movement?
Oh, you know what? I love science, and I always have. And today, if I pick up a magazine or a paper, well, I'll just tell you, I read Smithsonian every day. I read Science Daily, which is a release of science educational journals, peer-reviewed journals. And I just love that. And so when I was watching the Olympics last night, and I'm watching the half pipe, I'm looking at the angles that they're approaching as they're going up the wall, and what they're doing in flight, and then as they come down. And you can, it doesn't matter what the sport is. I continue to do that. I analyze it. And I was the same way as a coach, you know. So yeah, it plays a big part in my life, and continues to do so today.
I bet. And the half pipe was crazy last night. I mean, they're like 24 feet high, and it's just remarkable what athletes can do. And it really is. I thoroughly enjoyed things that I don't know anything about. You know, I secretly hope my children do something I know nothing about, because it would be a lot more fun for me. Now, your coaching career, right? You collegiately, you were at Arlington, and then you were on to Hawaii. And what were some of the things for you as a collegiate coach that you maybe liked the most, or have the fondest memories of, or what was that part of your career like, coaching collegiate softball and being a part of the softball community in that facet?
You know what? It was the interaction with the student athletes. I can't tell you what my win-loss record. I started coaching. My first college coaching job was at Texas Women's University, where I received my master's in kinesiology and biomechanics. And so I was the basketball coach there. And then I went on to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, a small private school, then Texas Arlington, then to Hawaii. And in each of those positions, it was the connection with the student athlete. Yes, was I competitive? Oh, I was so competitive. In fact, just as an athlete myself, you know, I played racquetball sometimes. A lot of people play racquetball. And I got to the point where no one wanted to play with me because I had to win no matter what. And so I was very competitive as a coach. But what touched me the most was to see an athlete that had been unsuccessful at something about the game, and then they became successful, and how that success begets additional success. And then how the lessons learned relate to life and where they are today. So that was my most favorite. I loved the X's and O's, and as I said, I was a student of the game, very competitive, but reaching those athletes and helping to change their lives in positive ways, not only in the game, but in other ways, is what I gained greatest satisfaction from.
Absolutely. And while you were coaching, somewhere in a small room, the conversation started, hey, we need our own coaches association. And in 83, and they grew and they grew. And then finally in 1991, someone talked you into something. So when you remember being a part of those conversations and the start of the association, which at the time was the National Softball Coaches Association, the NFCA, what do you remember about the early stages of our association, and what made you want to take on the opportunity of being the first full-time executive director?
You know what? I had started attending the conventions, and I saw a lot of people that were coaches that we played against one another in the 1970s professional league started by Janie Blaylock and Billie Jean King, and so I saw my friends, and I also felt like, again, from my mother, that you need to get involved and give back. So I started serving on different committees, and I became interested in leadership. And of course, the sport I loved, it was on a national perspective, and I thought I had the skill set and background that I could contribute to it. That coaches association, though, would not have started if it were not for people like Cindy Bristow and Judy Martino was, I think she might have been a volunteer. I don't know if she was paid executive director. But there were others in the field that were instrumental in starting that coaches association. So when I put my name in the hat, when the position opened for a first full-time executive director, it was a little bit of a leap of faith, not in my skill set and background, but there was not enough money in that association at the time to pay my salary for the year. But I believed that association could grow with the people that we had on the board that were putting so much effort into it.
Yeah, in my very short time doing some digging, I think in 91 it was $35 a year for dues, and the 1984 budget showed an income of $17,300 and some change, and expenses of $14,000. And I will say we continue to be extremely affordable, and so I hope everyone listening knows the value of the membership. But it grew exponentially in your tenure. So talk about that. What were your visions? What were your big dreams? When you came in, and what do you think? The time you sat in the chair that you were most proud of for the organization as it continued to grow?
I think some of the things that occurred is we added additional benefits that members would receive. So we had a monthly magazine that we put out. We always had the convention, but we started improving what we provided at the convention. We also changed, and this was I think one of the key things. Membership had always been by a certain date in the fall, and it's when universities started, colleges and universities started back to school in the fall. Well, you only had income coming in at that time, and you needed income coming in throughout the year. It was a cash flow issue. And so with the board support, we changed it to rolling enrollment. So you could enroll in membership at any time during the year. The other thing is that I knew the association could only grow that I thought was possible if we allowed high school coaches and summer coaches to join. And that it had been a college coaches association. Well, there's about a little over 300 NCAA Division I. There's fewer, or about that much in Division II, and then Division III was about 1,200 at the time. And so you have a really limited number of coaches. And so what we did is Louisville Slugger, who's been a big supporter of the NFCA for many years. I worked with the vice president at the time, Bill Clark, and it always bugged me that when I walked in a sporting goods store, stay with me because I have a path that I'm going, that I never saw posters of female athletes. So I talked to Bill Clark with Louisville Slugger, and I said, let's do a poster of Lisa Fernandez. She's the greatest pitcher that there is at this time. Let's do a color shot, an action shot. You cover the cost of it and the printing and mailing, and on the back we will have NFCA membership information. You know how you contact us. And we, in a mailing service, we paid for the poster to be sent out in the mailing tubes to 17,000 high school coaches. And that's when the membership took off. It was exponential. I was only there as executive director for 3 years, but we tripled our membership because of that. And with the rolling membership, we also didn't have the cash flow issue. So I think those things are probably really made the difference. And also, of course, changing the name to NFCA, National Fast Pitch Coaches Association, made the difference in what we could do, because unless we had the money, we were very limited in what we could provide to our coaches.
I love that so much. I've never heard that story. I think that's phenomenal. And you're right. And that is something that's different with the NFCA. Even today, when you look at other coaches associations, they're separate, or they do not include travel in high school. And, you know, we are just a few members shy of 6,000 right now, with more than half of those being high school and travel ball coaches. And truly not even scratching the surface, especially in the travel ball organizations, because there are so many and their coach turnover is so high, trying to find ways to cultivate that. But that was a huge vision on the part of that group and yourself. And I think that's something that's definitely going to be shared, but that's a fun one. You know, for you, it was such, I have to believe, and I can't wait to hear it from you, but such an idea in your mind of what could be. You know, when I look, you mentioned you were only there for a few years, and you went into the women's pro fast pitch and did so much there. Is that an overarching theme? Like when you see something, Rayla, do you just get excited, like what it could be, or things that just make your blood flow a little bit? Because it's definitely a theme I get from following all the things that you've done.
So I lost your last few words. I lost where you said definitely a theme, and then I didn't hear the other words.
Sorry, we are in a little technical difficulties here, cutting out a little bit. It seems to me that everything you've done, when I look through your CV and excitement that I get of seeing, wow, she was in everything, that I have to imagine you have that same feeling of, this is a great opportunity for growth, or this is very exciting, or, you know, there are just things that call to you. Is that how you would describe it too? Do you get excited about opportunities for growing and bringing people together?
I do, and I have an entrepreneurial spirit. You know, I started a food manufacturing company in the middle of my coaching career. It was hugely successful, but I realized I wasn't doing what I love. You know, you can only be around food so much. I like to eat it. I love to eat, actually, but so getting involved with the coaching association was so exciting, and also being involved in the first pro league in the 70s. You know, I've seen Billie Jean King as an athlete in watching Janie Blaylock on the LPGA. It was like, well, why can't we do that? And one of the things about my personality, I've just is I thought about the future, and I think part and the steps to take to get to that future. And I'll give you an example. When I started becoming involved in the NFCA, and became involved in some of the committees, and I encourage all coaches to give back and be involved. It came to me that I'd like to be the leader of this organization. And so I planned what committees I felt like were the most important, and put you at a higher profile and could show your leadership. And it was a systematic plan. And that's exactly what I did, and became the executive director. The same thing with starting the second pro league in the 90s. I thought, well, I was involved in the first one. It played for 4 years. It didn't continue. And so I want to be involved in the second one. And so that what the future look like, and then what you back up, and what are the things that you need to do, those steps, and then plot it on a chart, on a calendar, and then go after it, and launch it. And that excitement, that thrill of seeing something come to fruition and have success, but more importantly, what is the impact of that? I just get excited thinking about it. What's the impact of having a professional league that our young girls and female athletes can aspire to be involved in? Whatever way they may. It may be on the field, it may be in the management side of it, but they can aspire to that, and the difference that it makes in their lives.
How could you not be as right? And there's so much that goes into it. And I grew up in Central Ohio in the late 90s, and I spent time watching Akron Racers games. I wasn't close enough to go to a lot, but got to a few. And I miss that for kids right now, that we aren't there. We don't have it nationwide, and some of those things. What do you think, Rayla, and maybe this is a loaded question, but we'll go with it. What do you think we as a sport have to do for a sustainable long-term professional softball league?
You know what? We need to make that leap from being avid players. I'm certainly, which you cannot do this, but if you just look at the number of participants in fast pitch across the nation and the world, it continues to grow. You would think it would be highly successful as a professional sport. But avid players and avid fans that were former players does not make the type of attendance that you need for professional sport. So when you think about professional sport, when we think about, and this is the data, right? Gather all the data so you understand how it can be successful. When we think of the big four, NBA, NFL, MLB, and we can throw Major League Soccer in there. When you think of the big four, of course, years, many decades to grow to where they are today. You have to have more than the avid fan attending. And so we haven't reached that point. It's interesting, when we launched the league and our contract, I was involved in the ESPN2 negotiations. And when we had the ESPN2 contract, our television ratings were higher than the NHL most of the time in regular season play. So we've got a nice compact game, but we don't have enough fans to support it. So when you look on the revenue side of where money comes in, the big four, excluding the NHL, or three, they make their revenue through television deals, right? And then NHL is second. Their second source of revenue is TV deals. So we have to have TV involved, but TV doesn't get involved unless they have the spectators, because the basis of TV is you sell advertising to sponsors that want to get their products in front of hundreds of thousands of spectators. And so it's a vicious cycle until you get to that point. The other thing is, I think, culturally valuing women's professional sports. So I had an assistant who was a fabulous assistant in the pro league, and it wasn't a administrative assistant. It was the assistant to the vice president and commissioner, that was my position, who said that she valued a ticket to University of Minnesota men's basketball game more than she did the women's basketball game. And this is before Lindsay Whalen took the team to the Final Four. And so I was struck by that. Why is that? And it's culture in the United States. We do not women, female athletes at the level as we value professional male athletes. It is changing though. When we see the following of the women snowboarders and what's happened in that sport, we see a great difference in the interest in following female athletes. But you still look to our newspapers, our TV news, books out on sports. And when you look at, it used to be that, let's see, I think it was 92%, this is maybe 20 years ago, 92% of what was in the media on sports was male sports. And then it was, the second part of it was, I think 6% was non-human sports, like dog racing, okay? And then 2% on women's sports, you know, the media coverage. Well, we've passed dog racing now, but we're still way behind in terms of media coverage. And if the media doesn't cover you, then it's not a value in the American public. And so it's just a vicious cycle, but it is slowly changing to the good, but it's actually still a very bad proposition, even though televised games of pro fast pitch had higher ratings than NHL regular season games.
Oh, I hear you, and there's so much there to unpack, and we've been unpacking some of that at the collegiate level too, especially recently with, you know, the gender equity report, and a year ago the, you know, now viral TikTok showing the difference between a men's basketball weight room and a women's basketball weight room and in the Final Four. With your world experiences, Rayla, as you watch this unfold and in the spotlight that was shown on some of the gender equity, what are the things that came to your mind? You know, what made you shake your head in disbelief? Like, well, yeah, this has been going on for a long time. You know, and what were the things that, and that entrepreneurial spirit got you a little bit excited because maybe, just maybe, real change was on the horizon?
You know, it's really tough to change unless you recognize that there needs to be change. And we know that we've all tried to probably do something for our health, like lose weight. I've tried to lose weight since probably I was born. And I know I should do it, right? But I never get around to it. So change is hard. It's even harder when you don't even acknowledge that you need to change. And so we still have a mindset in some people that are operating in our college sports administration that they don't even give it a second thought. There's not a realization they need to change. And then we have a large group of people that know that we need to change. When I heard about that with the women's Final Four, I was in one way ecstatic because it pointed out we need to change that. That's the first step of change. And of course, it had been going on for years. And let me shift the conversation a little bit to Title IX. Where are we today? Our participation rates are not quite where they need to be, but they're within probably about 3 percentage points. And that is true at high school sports and college sports. What you go down to the next level, which is that part that needs to be changed, is having the weight rooms and having a weight room that is the quality that men's sports have. Men in it's more on sport, it's women that are being discriminated against. So it's the other thing is travel, accommodation when you're traveling, your meals, and I don't practice anymore, but you know, I represented a college coach in one of our landmark Title IX cases about 20 years after that case was solved. Okay, and I don't want to reveal who it was because that breaks confidentiality, but there was a landmark Title IX case in the late 70s that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this Division I institution, right, they lost. They were supposed to change. And so go fast forward to 20 years later, and a college coach from that particular university calls me and it had felt like there was discrimination on salary, okay, all the perks that some of the male coaches get along in their contract, discrimination in terms of practice facilities, competition facilities, locker rooms, treatment in terms of athletic training. And that was 20 years after a landmark case that went to the Supreme Court. So our next thing that we need to do is look at those other things. There's 13 components to Title IX in an athletic case that's reviewed. And if you're out of compliance with one, you're violating the law. And so we need to get to all those other things. Then we have coaches that I would advise, they're afraid to bring up anything. Even longtime experienced Hall of Fame coaches don't want to bring it up because they know there's well to those coaches that let somebody else do the work for you, right? Bring in people and contact people that you know that will, like, I don't practice it anymore, but there are other attorneys out there. There's the Office of Civil Rights. There are ways to bring in people that you can remain silent, but provide information to. And of course, that's the way to go. I had a college coach I represented probably 10 years ago, a Division I coach, that I said, I need for you to go to the library to get some information. And because in the budget, it's always filed in the library, right? And it's in the collection and you can't check it out, but you need to take notes or take photographs and stuff. I said, but don't tell anybody. And because I knew there was retribution. And the coach unfortunately talked to some other coaches asking what their salary was and what their budget was rather than going to the library. Well, the athletic director called her out of her office, went down, took her down the hall and around the corner and said, if you ever ask for more information, I'll fire you. So I want to help our coaches improve in terms of Title IX, but I also want them to be reasonable, that there are people to help you and you can provide the information to them. And if you are fortunate to be in a position that you feel like you can go to an attorney and file an OCR complaint or an actual civil suit, then do so. It's hard to come by those people because they don't want to lose their job, but you need to do that. The other thing I think we need to watch out in women's sports, collegiate sports altogether, is that the business model of Division I sports is not sustainable. It just is not. The model is, and we have men's basketball, and if you're in the north, it might be men's hockey as well, that they're going to make enough money to support all the other sports in the athletic program. And you know what? That is not sustainable, because when you look at it, I spoke at a law conference about 6 years ago. When I was looking at it, there really was only about 24 Division I programs that model would work. And there's a little over 300 Division I schools. And so for the vast majority, it's not looking. So here's my prediction. Unless the business model changes, what will they do to be viable in the business of running college athletics? They will cut sports, and they'll cut men's and women's sports to do that, to keep those that the top sports, they're not the top sports, they're one of many sports, but to keep those sports they feel like are the cash cows still available and ready to go with the money behind them. It's very clear that in terms of keeping those sports, football and men's basketball, running, that they're going to have to change where the money is coming from, the revenue is coming from, and also their expenses. And they only can fill so many seats. The TV contracts, unlike professional contracts, the TV contracts in college sports it's amazing what they're getting now, but there is a ceiling on it. and the value of college sports. So it's one of those things to look out for. Therefore, I think it's even more important for our college coaches what the law is in Title IX, what are the resources, and who can help you, and go to the people that can help you. That also means I'll bring up Patsy Mink, of course, was one of the she actually was one of the senators that started the bill on Title IX. And Patsy Mink, when I was at University of Hawaii, I invited, it's University of Hawaii is the main sport there because of the lack of professional sports in Hawaii. So in my foresight, I felt like I should invite representatives and senators of the state who fund the University of Hawaii, right, through the budgeting process and the state government to games, and they would be bench coaches. And so I invited Patsy Mink to be a bench coach, and she met all the players before the game started, and I had explained who she was and how important she was and why she was important to the athletes. And so during the game, at one point, I came back into the dugout when the team was taking the field, and she said, "Coach, I've been asking some of your players if they know what Title IX is." And she said, "They don't. It's your responsibility to teach them." So I would say to our coaches today, it's your responsibility to teach our female athletes and our male coaches as well, to teach the female athletes, those will be coming up behind you. What is Title IX? What are the resources out there? What does it mean? And what can they do about it?
Absolutely. I hope every coach who's listening is thinking, how can I make sure the student athletes, the assistant coaches, the coaches in my department, whomever it might be that I'm working with, understands this. And as you were speaking, we talked a little bit on the question list about Patsy Mink. I thought, I wonder how many people know that, she's the author of the Title IX legislation in so many ways. And I bet not many. And so I think even just identifying those core individuals who played a role in being able, especially now, there's so much information out there, the 50th anniversary, there's so many things. But the question that's probably on everybody's mind, Rayla, is when did you have time for law school? Like, was that just a thing? You're like, oh, I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, because you're kidding me. I mean, and that's one of those, hey, I've done X, Y, Z, and ABC, and so I'm gonna go into law. Where did that urge come from? And I'm sure it's something you're glad you did, but when and why?
It's because of NFCA. So I wasn't even hired. I hadn't started the NFCA in a leadership position. But I knew I was going to be the next executive director. And it was at a College World Series, and Oregon State University was going to drop their softball program. And the coach, Vicki Dugan at the time, called Sharon Backus, who I played ball with on the Falcons and who's a dear friend and was a UCLA coach. Vicki called and said, "What should I do?" And Sharon didn't even know I was going to be the next executive director. And I don't know why she said it, but she said, "Call Rayla. She'll know what to do." And I was at the World Series. And so I talked to Vicki Dugan. And the next thing I did is I called Donna Lopiano, who all the coaches should know who that person is. She in women's sports. And she said, call the National Women's Law Center and you can get some good advice. So I called the National Women's Law Center. I talked to she was maybe the president or executive director of the National Women's Law Center, who gave me information to collect data to help support that Oregon State University may be violating Title IX if they drop the program. So I then called Vicki Dugan back and I said, "I need this information. Go to your library to get it." And she did. And so we got things like participation rates, male and female. We got salaries. We got scholarships. Something in all of the 13 areas. And then I started a letter writing, faxing campaign at the World Series. And I talked to the coaches that were there. So if you, yeah, I hope no program is dropped, but if you're going to drop a college program, don't do it during the World Series when all the coaches are together, because there was no email at that time. So college coaches, I drafted a letter, and then they would handwrite and change a few things about the letter, but put in there the data to show that Oregon State University was out of compliance with, it appeared as though they were out of compliance with Title IX. And I had the general counsel for Oregon State call me and say, and it was being sent to the president's office, called me and said, please stop the faxes to the president's office. And I also had sent the letters with, it appeared as though Oregon State University was out of compliance with Title IX, to the local media, and I sent it to their representatives, to the U.S. Congress for the state, and to their state legislature. And stated program. And a few years later, Oregon State said they never dropped the program, but there are media articles that were out there to prove them wrong. They tried to basically cover it up. But with that experience, and then a few months later, Joyce Compton, who was the coach at University of South Carolina, called me. Similar situation, dropping the program. I used the same strategies, got that reinstated, and that spurred my interest in law school. So, I took the law exam, did entrance exam, and got into law school. I deferred for a year because I went from being executive director of the NFCA to helping launch the second pro league. And I had moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul, because the financiers were there. And so I deferred a year, and then I went to law school. And what I would do is I was on the road 50 out of 52 weeks a year trying to launch the pro league. And so I went to night law school, and I would study on airplanes. Anywhere I would get a chance, I would study. And that's how I did it. And it's interesting, Joanna, that I am so glad I became an attorney, because I intimately understand Title IX, Title VII, Employment Discrimination, Pregnancy Discrimination Act, all of those areas. And most of my work was representing plaintiffs in discrimination cases, and not just in athletics. So I'm so glad I went. It was a struggle to do it. But I could continue to make a difference in people's lives, and of any kind. I'm one of those crazy fools that will say something when I see it happening, discrimination happening. But unless we speak up, people think it's okay to discriminate. So I'm so glad I did it. And in fact, when I turned into the Bar Association in Minnesota that I would move to a non-practicing attorney, the next day I got the call from this landmark case that went to the Supreme Court from the college coach that wanted me to represent her. And so I helped her find some attorneys. But I had never planned on becoming a lawyer, and it's because of my experience at NFCA in those first 6 months that I felt like I could make more of a difference in that happening, and hoping to help fight against discrimination.
Well, I love that so much. And, I hope my husband doesn't listen to this podcast, because I've told him forever I'm going to go to law school next. And he just thinks it's crazy. But the emotion that comes with it, we were so fortunate that our membership and our leaders in 2016 saw the value of having legal counsel for our members. And we added an NFCA counsel to a member benefit. Samantha Ekstrand from Ekstrand in North Carolina is our NFCA attorney, and the work that she has done for so many coaches on so many different things has just been palpable. It's amazing. And the growth of the sport and the protection that she's offered, and when people just don't know where to turn, being able to offer that from a coaches association, it was amazing. So if you ever get that itch again, Rayla, we've got plenty of opportunity for you to stay involved with the members and that, counseling side. It's just so crucial today and every day. So many of our members need and desire that. And I think it's very cool that you were on the front end of that as well. Do you think, are there things that you're looking at now and you think, 1972, I was graduating from high school in Title IX, and my expectations of where we would be as women in sport have exceeded, have fallen short, when you look at it, what do you get feeling wise, and where do you think we've made the strides and where we just are disappointing where we stand?
Well, I'm elated about the strides that we have made for women's sports, and thank goodness we have. It's a lot of people contributing to that, and even the plaintiffs or the complainants in an office of civil rights. It also takes the fathers. It's not only the women that are doing it. It takes the fathers or the brothers or the male coaches to also help in that fight. So we've had a good fight, but we are so far away. We're not close. We just are not close to having equity in women's sports. And I think of the women's U.S. soccer team. That's a prime example of it, of what they've gone through in terms of pay equity. And so it's persistent throughout certainly the American culture, and it is so throughout the world. And we have so much to do. If I was focusing only on Title IX, though, I would say we need to get to the other 12 of the 13 factors that you review in a Title IX athletic case. And of course, there's fewer than that. It's 11 factors in high school cases. The other thing is, usually every city will have a non-discrimination law. And so when I think of our summer youth coaches, where do they go? They're not in at an educational institution, which is one of the criteria of the law in Title IX. So what do they do? But most cities will have a non-discrimination policy. And so if they can't get fields, or they can only get them at the weirdest hours or whatever it may be, they can turn to a city ordinance and look to that for some relief as well. But we have so much work to do. I'm happy for all of the girls and women that are participating now, and for our coaches and where they are. I mean, we have college athletes and young high school athletes or summer athletes that they have no clue. They think what they're receiving now is just great, right? They're just so happy to be playing, and they have no clue of where they need to go in the sport and what needs to happen in all of women's sports. And so that's why I think our coaches can help educate them and the parents about the law and where can they go and how can they make differences. And it's when more and more people are speaking out. When parents go with their daughter to visit colleges, if they were to when they get, they meet the coaches, but they usually meet other people. Well, just imagine if they met the athletic director or maybe a professor and said, well, can you tell me about here at this campus? If parents ask that, So I'm elated on one hand, I'm disappointed on another, and I know there's a lot of work to be done. And I hope our leaders in NFCA and elsewhere can continue that work.
Well, thank you very much. And we always end our podcast with a piece of advice. So for those that are listening, you've already given so much. So if it's something that's redundant, that is completely okay. But for people who are listening, what advice would you give the coach who's listening on whatever it is, if it's their professional growth, if it's gender equity, if it's, investing in the sport or themselves, anything goes. What piece of advice stands out to you?
So I'm certainly not going to share any coaching advice, and I've given a lot of advice through this discussion. I would say that coaches, don't be self-centered only on your team and your athletes and how good your team is doing. If you're going to make real change, you need to get out there and do other things, get involved, and you become a great mentor for the people around you, including players. You also help grow the sport. If you have some, just think about when the running slap came into the game many years ago, and Gail Blevins at University of Iowa introduced that. If she had not given clinics on that technique and how it worked, it helped difference in the so way you can. Don't be selfish with your players. Go bigger than that. Think broader than that. Stretch yourself and do more.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a ton of fun. For those of you listening, this is only the first in several installments that are coming up. And I don't know if we'll get the 6 degrees of name separation from everyone else that we got from Rayla. Just on a recap, we had Donna Lopiano, we have Marsha Greenberger. We've had, who else have you had? Just mega, Patsy, just mega stars in the quest for gender equity. And obviously, Rayla, you have been a big part of that as well. So thank you so much for giving your time then, giving your time now, and just continuing to help us. We hope that we see you in San Antonio in December. I know it's closer than normal for you, so hopefully your other duties will not interfere this year. I know that's tough, but truly it's been a pleasure having you with us today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And of course, anything with NFCA is a love for me and a passion. And I hope to be in San Antonio. And I actually plan on seeing some college softball games this spring. So it's good to be involved.
Well, thank you again. And for those of you listening, we'll be back next week. And until then, this has been Joanna Lane, Senior Director of Education with the NFCA and The Dirt NFCA podcast presented by Netting Professionals.